Today we are talking about fallacy 18, which is the is-ought fallacy. This is a fallacy of presumption, which are arguments that make unwarranted assumptions about either the data or the nature of an unreasonable argument. It's also a fallacy of presupposition, which is an argument that contains hidden assumptions that make them unreasonable. The is-ought fallacy is an argument that assumes that just because something is a certain way that it ought to be that way.
Okay, so it's like there is nothing unreasonable about accepting and approving of various traditions, practices, customs, and laws, but our approval of them should be based upon more than the mere fact of just their existence. There ought to be a reason for speed limits beyond the fact of just their existence. In other words, we should not uncritically accept various practices simply because they just exist.
This is a lot like the fallacy we discussed back in chapter 2, the chronological snobbery fallacy, where you're justifying something purely because of its age and not because of any reason.
And that we will get into later. Okay, so some examples that did not come from the book are, one of them that really stood out to me was marijuana is a plant that grows naturally in the earth, so we should legalize it. Just because this fallacy kind of works by stating what something is, or what the current rule is. So it's just because it is a plant that grows naturally doesn't mean that it's right or that it should be legal. And the whole point of it is that it's harmful to others and ourselves, and so it's really not about if it's a plant that grows naturally or not.
Yeah, and another good one was that murder happens in humankind every day and that we just need to accept that this is part of our nature. Well, just because it happens every day doesn't mean that we should accept it, and just because it exists among humans, that doesn't mean that it should. So
the one that I saw was the Electoral College is specified in the Constitution, so we should not do away with it. Just because it is in the Constitution does not mean it is moral or right, which is true. Just because we made it 300 years ago in the Constitution doesn't mean that we have to keep it today, because it might not be the best way of doing things anymore. So we are able to change them.
Yes. Another one was war is good for mankind because the tendency to conflict is human instinct. Just because the tendency to have conflict and stuff is human instinct does not make it okay or good for mankind in any way. It's just it is harmful to people, and obviously conflict is not something that we want or something that's good. And so there's no way that it would be good for mankind just because it is human instinct, because a lot of human instincts are not necessarily right.
Drew, do you want to talk about how it relates to the chronological?
Oh, well, some people confuse chronological snobbery and the is-ought fallacy pretty often. The is-ought fallacy is more of not giving a reason for why we should keep something the same instead of changing it. And then the chronological snobbery fallacy is more of trying to appeal to someone's sense of age or youth by saying, this is old, don't do this. That's the chronological snobbery fallacy. Or this is new, so you should want this. But the is-ought fallacy is more of, we've been doing this for so long, why change it now? So that's kind of the difference between the two fallacies, since they're pretty easy to confuse.
Yeah, but they are kind of similar because, chronological snobbery is just saying that, something is good the way it is, so you should keep it like that. And same with this is that, if it works, why change it? So they are similar, but, yeah.
Okay, so one of the discussion points in the book was a kind of a scenario, and it was the student council president said students should have a greater voice in the decision-making process of the school. The principal said, well, a school is not really a democratic organization, and we are not going to try to change the governmental structure. There are many other important issues on which we should focus. So why do y'all think that this is the is-ought fallacy?
Well, mostly because it's saying that the school is not a democratic organization, so there's no point to try to change it. Like, it already works the way it is. So, like, why question it? Why give students a chance to, have a greater voice whenever they've never had it before? Like, just leave it alone, because it's always been that way.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. Because that it's not a democratic organization, so why change that? And they don't really like to move forward a ton. And so they just want to stick to the way it is, and they don't really want to change anything because it's worked this long, so they say might as well keep it the same.
Yeah, something I said was that he gave no reason to why it's not a democratic organization, and no reasoning behind why they're not going to change it. He just said that it's not, so it's not, and it won't be.
Yeah, you can tell which ones are which, the is-ought fallacy, because, like the definition said, it's an argument that assumes that just because something is a certain way that it ought to be that way. Like, just because it is, you should just leave it alone. So those are easy to spot. And yeah, so basically it's a lot like chronological snobbery, because it's saying that just because something is old, that it's better, or that you shouldn't change it because it's, it works the way that it is, and that you don't need to change it. So
yes, one of the picture, the advertisement ones that are in the book is, if God didn't want us to eat animals, then why did he make them out of meat? With that delicious, yummy steak on there. This is a fallacy, because it assumes that meat, just because it's made out of meat, means that it actually should be eaten and it's moral to be eaten. And a lot of people don't agree with that.
Yeah, and I mean, that could be very broad, because it's saying doesn't want us to eat animals, why did he make them out of meat? Well, I mean, we don't eat dogs and horses and stuff. There's only certain, I don't know, that's a weird one.
Yeah, a big thing about this fallacy is kind of the idea of not asking why we do something, just saying that it is this way and so it should be that way. So that's why this advertisement right here that says why ask why is this kind of fallacy, because there's no reason behind it. They're just accepting it because it is. So yes.
Yeah, that's pretty much the whole point of the fallacy, is just you don't ask questions, you just accept.
Okay, we're going to start by giving some examples from the book. The first one was, there has always been a lower caste in India that has been impoverished, and there always will be. We must accept this fact. So basically this is a fallacy, because just because there has been an impoverished lower class in India for centuries does not mean that it should continue, or that we should not seek to change it.
Okay, so the example that I got from the book was, how can you criticize people for gambling at casinos? Gambling is a legal activity in this state. Saying that just because it's legal, we should do it, and that there's no reason to change it because that's the way it's always been.
Okay, and the third example from the book is, why do you want to pay lower taxes? Tax rates are set by Congress, and they are the law of the land. This one is basically just saying that since taxes have always been around and they've always been, set the way they are, that they should just stay that way, and there's no reason to change them because that's the way they've always been. So that kind of sounds like, what's that one? The chronological
snobbery.
Yeah,
So the is-ought fallacy are arguments that assume that just because something is a certain way, that it ought to be that way forever.
Yeah, basically, these are just arguments that are based on unwarranted assumptions, and these arguments assume that something is right or preferable simply because it's just the way things are at the moment.
This will conclude the fallacy 18, which is, of course, a fallacy of presupposition, which is arguments that can contain hidden assumptions that make them unreasonable. And as Socrates said, if we stick in the past and stick to the way things have always been, we'll never move to the future, as it says at the end. And so that'll conclude today's fallacy, but tomorrow we will learn about fallacy 19, the fallacy of composition.